Hi, my name is Tim Schobel, and I'm a NetSuite consultant with Business Solution Partners, and today we're going to be reviewing the process for adding subsidiary relationships to a vendor record. So this is a scenario that applies to One World accounts with multiple subsidiaries configured and with multi-subsidiary vendors enabled, in which vendors can be shared across multiple subsidiaries and thus be made available for transactions out of any of those subsidiaries in NetSuite. This process can also apply to customers. In a One World account, customers can also be shared across multiple subsidiaries, and we would follow a very similar process I'm going to go through in this video for updating customer records. But today I'm going to be focusing on updating vendor records. So we're going to begin by reviewing the subsidiary relationships under some existing vendor records under lists, relationships, vendors. So here I'm going to pick a few vendors. I'm going to go review the subsidiary subtab that's been exposed on the vendor form to view the subsidiary relationships under each of these vendors. I can see that each of these vendors is only shared across the United States subsidiary, so I want to add some remaining subsidiary relationships to each of these three vendors. So I can review my subsidiaries under Setup Company Subsidiaries. Here I can see that I also have an Australian subsidiary, a Canadian subsidiary, and a United Kingdom subsidiary. And the internal IDs associated with each of those are 3, 4, and 5. So to update my vendors, I can review this list and view their internal IDs. I see that the internal IDs associated with each of the vendors that I displayed earlier are 621, 622, and 623. So I can create an import template that references the internal IDs of each of these vendors, as well as the internal IDs of each of these subsidiaries, to add these subsidiary relationships to those vendors. And that template looks like this. Here I've got the internal IDs of each of those vendors and a row for each subsidiary relationship that I'm adding. And we can see that I'm referencing the internal ID of the subsidiary here in column C and the internal ID of the vendor here in column A. I don't actually need the name of the vendor, but I've kept it in this import file just for display purposes. So I'm not going to actually map this on our import, but I will conduct the import now. So that's under Setup, Import Export, Import CSV Records. I've picked vendor subsidiary relationship here. There's also a customer subsidiary relationship if multi-subsidiary customers have been enabled in your account, but they have not been enabled yet in this account. I'll select the file. It's already been saved in CSV format. I'm adding these subsidiary relationships. So you're going to at least choose add, but you might also choose add or update depending on how you set up your file. Here I can see that subsidiary is already mapped. The only two fields, by the way, that are required are subsidiary and vendor. You can see those already displaying on the right side of our map. We know that internal ID corresponds to the vendor. I could also map the name since it's copied exactly, but I'll just do the internal ID since we're already referencing the internal ID of the subsidiary. I'm going to hit this pencil icon to make sure I'm referencing the vendor's internal ID for mapping to the vendor. And I'll do the same thing with the subsidiary, referencing its internal ID for mapping to the subsidiary here. And I'll click Next. I can give this import a unique name, or I can just run it. So I am on the job status page, and I can see that 9 of 9 records imported successfully. You'll recall that the import template had 9 rows in it. And I can go back to my vendors list here, and I can view each of these vendors again and verify that that import was successful. So I'm going to review the subsidiary subtab here. And I can see that those remaining subsidiary relationships have been added. for each of these vendors. All right, and that's the process for adding subsidiary relationships in NetSuite. Have a good one.